30 years of inquiries and investigations.
Police are trying desperately hard to hold them back, and at the moment it is simple mayhem.
I remember hearing about Hillsborough when it happened, seeing it on the TV news. I was growing up in Manchester at the time. It was only really when I started working for the BBC as a North of England correspondent that I began to look in close detail at it. That was 10 years ago or so, and I've spent 10 years following every twist and turn of it, and there have been so many twists and turns. To fully understand Hillsborough, you have to look at what happened in 1989. Back then, Hillsborough was one of the most prestigious grounds in England, chosen to host one of the most important football fixtures in the calendar, the FA Cup semi-final. And for the second year in a row, Liverpool were drawn against Nottingham Forest. The Nottingham fans went north and the Scousers went east across the Pennines, and they converged here on the west side of the ground at Leppings Lane. It was a sunny day and Liverpool had everything to play for. The fans arrived full of hope, but the problem soon began here outside the ground. With minutes to go before kick-off, there were still thousands of people here waiting to get in.
Thousands can't get in, they've just broken gates down. Superintendent Marshall screaming for them to open inner gates to let people in, and money is staying in control. We've got to monitor tickets. If we get Liverpool mixed up with that Scottish, we're going to have trouble.
It was at this moment that a critical decision was made by David Duckenfield. He ordered a large exit gate to be opened, and more than 2,000 fans poured into the ground.
They opened the gates and they just let us walk in. Didn't even take it off us.
You didn't have to come through a turnstile, you come through a gate that you go out at the end of the game.
But the area they headed to down the main tunnel was already full. Back then, like many football grounds, Hillsborough had a terrace section where supporters would stand to watch the game. They were fenced in behind metal railings which were installed to stop pitch invasions. But effectively it meant the fans were penned into cages.
They're all dying, you want to get older and you want to tell them to stop it.
Today in Liverpool, it feels as though everyone has some connection to the disaster.
There was a lad I used to go to school with who was actually on one of the front pages with his arm across. It was a horrible situation.
I was at university at Edghill and we had people that had been at the ground and came home. But obviously there are a lot of people that didn't come home, about 96.
I was only young at the time and I did have two uncles there as well. It stopped them going to football completely.
How do you ever get over that? You send your child to a football match with his dad and they don't come home.
Every time singing Never Walk Alone, you always have a tear in your eye and you think back to them poor people who never get to sing that again, will they? You know.
The bereaved families and survivors have campaigned for justice for 3 decades. Recently, a new group has been set up to help those who were in the crush. Diane, Damien and Ian were all there, and their memories of what it was like have haunted them for 30 years. This is the first time they've described their experiences to each other.
I could hear my friend who was ended up just behind me. She was shouting that she was dying and I needed to help her. Couldn't do anything to help her. I was trying to breathe myself. Every time I took a breath, it was stopping at my throat because it just couldn't expand my lungs at all. I was a student nurse at the time, but my body just didn't do anything, and the guilt of not helping is just unreal.
Suicide attempts, self-harm. I'm tattooed because that was the more positive alternative to cut myself. I've lost family members because of it. I've lost a daughter because of it, and it's all because of Hillsborough.
And when the subject of Hillsborough comes up in the media, it regurgitates things. You know, it's a very difficult place for us to integrate into our lives. We'll never get over what happens, but we can learn to live with it. I know that, you know, if people describe you or how you'll be remembered in life, they'll say, oh, you know, he was a dad, he was this and he was that. I know that, you know, Hillsborough survivor will be something that people will say, yeah, that marked his life, didn't it? Quite clearly, it did. It's marked all our lives, hasn't it?
The survivors have lived with the trauma of the crush ever since, but 96 people didn't get out. They were young and old, a 10-year-old boy, 37 teenagers, parents, 2 sisters, a father and son, a mother, a pensioner of 67. Their families hold their memories tight, the love undimmed through the generations.
I lost my uncle before I even had the chance to meet him. I now have a gap that I'll never be able to fill.
So I'm the sister of Brian Matthews, who was killed at Hillsborough, and I've spent over half my lifetime trying to defend his good name.
I'm only 25 now. This is all I've ever known.
For 30 years, I don't think I've experienced a day where Hillsborough has never been mentioned.
I've never actually been to the Hillsborough Stadium myself, but I could draw you out a plan of the ground. I could show you the entry route. I could detail all the turnstiles.
She's at the moment studying to be a barrister. It's not a career that she's chosen of her own free will. It's a career that she's chosen because of the injustices that we've suffered.
People often ask me, why is Hillsborough still going on? And in fairness, if you told the families and survivors back in 1989 that their case would still be going through the courts today, they'd have been horrified. So why has it taken so long? Well, I suppose one of the answers is that whilst there have been inquiries and investigations over the years, some of them didn't hit the mark. And that's because they weren't looking then at the full range of evidence which is available now. For years, it always felt to the families and the survivors that it was them against the establishment. But then there was this moment, I remember being at Anfield for the 20th anniversary memorial service. It was a really seminal moment because that's when this single heckle started from the cop towards Andy Burnham, who was Culture Secretary at the time.
Will never be forgotten. And he asked us to think at this time
one cry for justice, that wave it started, has carried on right through to today. That, I think, is what sent the signal to Westminster about the importance of releasing all of the documents around Hillsborough. That led the way to the creation of the Hillsborough Independent Panel. Its report in 2012 was really important. It led the way towards new inquests.
With the weight of the new evidence in this report, it is right for me today, as Prime Minister, to make a proper apology to the families of the 96.
In 2015, David Duckenfield gave evidence, and now, 4 years later, the audio recording of it has just been released.
Do you agree with the following? That people died in a crush in the central pens?
Yes, sir.
That if they had not been permitted to flow down the tunnel into those central pens, that would not have occurred?
Yes, sir.
That closing the tunnel would have prevented that, and therefore would have prevented the tragedy?
Yes, sir.
That you failed to recognise that there was a need to close that tunnel?
I did fail to recognise that, sir, yes.
And therefore failed to take steps to achieve that?
I did, sir.
And that failure was the direct cause of the deaths of 96 persons in the Hillsborough tragedy?
Yes, sir.
David Duckenfield was also asked about the lie he told on the afternoon of the disaster when he told the FA that fans had broken their way into the ground.
I was probably deeply ashamed, embarrassed, greatly distressed. I probably didn't want to admit to myself or anyone else what the situation is. What I would like to say to the Liverpool families is this. I regret that omission, and I shall regret it to my dying day.
And in 2016, the inquest jury found, first of all, that the fans who died and who went to Hillsborough weren't to blame in any way. And secondly, really crucially, that those who died were unlawfully killed.
I always hoped, I dreamt that we would get the decision. I'm only glad we did.
I was one of the few journalists allowed inside the courtroom when the verdicts were handed down, and the families were crying, the lawyers were crying, and it tested me. I felt that sense of history, but I remember at the same time wondering what it would mean for the next step of the legal journey.
This is unlawful killing, so someone's broke the law. So who is it?
The inquests found that David Duckenfield's actions contributed to the deaths. But an inquest isn't a trial. The match commander was charged with the manslaughter of 95 Liverpool fans. The 96th victim, Tony Bland, died nearly 4 years